I sit at my own dinner table, floor-to-ceiling windows behind me, the city skyline going gold with evening light, marble cool under my elbows, with oxygen tubing looped behind my ear, and I understand every word of it. My wife doesn't know that yet. Neither does her son. In 11 seconds, they will say something about the one wound I have never spoken of out loud to either of them. And they will say it laughing. Hold that moment. We'll come back to it. My name is Kelechi Adeyemi. I am 58 years old, and I look 70, because Ines borrows years you haven't lived yet and spends them on your face while you're still standing in front of the mirror wondering where they went. 10 years before that dinner, a factory explosion took the hearing in my left ear. Emergency surgery afterward took something else, the chance to ever father a child of my own. I don't talk about this. Every retelling reopens it, fresh, like the surgery happened yesterday instead of a decade ago. So I let the world assume I simply never wanted children. Easier than the truth. Easier than watching pity cross someone's face. Instead of bitterness, I built things. Import and logistics first, then real estate, until I had more money than one careful man could reasonably spend on himself in 3 lifetimes. I funded churches without my name on the cornerstone. I built a children's home and never once visited it with cameras following. I prayed, some nights on the cold floor of my study, that God would still find a way to hand me a family, even one not born from my own blood. Then I met Nkeru. A widow. An immigrant, raising a 15-year-old son named turned alone, in a country that hadn't made a single thing easy for her. She spoke about forgiveness like a woman who'd needed to practice it daily just to survive. She spoke about second chances like she understood, from the inside, exactly what one cost. I believed her the way a thirsty man believes the first well he finds is clean. When my lungs began to fail, slowly, then all at once, the oxygen tank became furniture in my house, as permanent as the dining table beneath that chandelier. Around that time, I made a decision nobody knew about. Not my lawyer. Not my pastor. Only Mama Sod, my housekeeper of 11 years, watched me do it, night after night, for 6 months straight. I was learning Nkeru's native language. Not because she asked. She never asked. I wanted, just once before I died, to pray beside my wife in the language she dreamed in as a child, the language her mother sang her to sleep with, buried somewhere beneath the English we shared, the way roots live under a tree nobody thinks to dig for. I wanted that to be a gift only I could give her. Not money. Not property. Time I did not have to spare. I practiced with recordings between hospital visits, lips moving in the backs of taxis. Mama Sod caught me at the kitchen table more times than I can count and never once asked why. She'd only smile, the way she did the night she told me, wiping a counter she wasn't really looking at.
Love always sounds sweeter in someone's mother tongue.
I believe that completely. I had no idea the very language I was building in secret, out of love, would become the exact instrument God used to show me the truth, and that the 11 seconds you just heard were only the opening line of what I'd understand that night, sitting under my own chandelier, in my own home, listening to my own family decide I was already gone. If you've ever loved someone quietly, without needing them to know how deep it ran, tell me below, I want to hear it. Subscribe now. What happens at that table is coming, but first, you need to know how I got there, and what they didn't know I'd already survived once before. Before Nkeru, my house held a silence that wasn't peaceful, a guest wing kept made up for guests who never came, a marriage bed I slept in diagonally because there was no reason to keep to one side, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a skyline I watched alone most nights with a glass of water I didn't finish. I met her at a charity dinner I was quietly funding, in a hall much smaller and warmer than my own dining room. She wasn't there to be seen. Sleeves rolled up, feeding toddlers who weren't hers, laughing without performing for anyone watching. I watched her 10 full minutes before I found a thin excuse to introduce myself. I asked her opinion of the soup. It was terrible. She told me so without flattery. I liked her instantly for it. Ton was 15. Quiet around me at first, watch for the way boys get when they've already buried one father and are deciding whether it's safe to trust a second. I didn't push. I'd learned, watching wealthier men than me try and fail, that a boy who's lost a father can smell a bribe from across a room, no matter how it's wrapped. There was one evening, early on, when I overheard him on the phone with a friend, voice low, saying he didn't need a replacement, that his real father had built things with his hands, not just signed checks for them. I let it go. Grief says cruel things sometimes, and I told myself it wasn't really about me. I told myself a boy is allowed to miss his father without it being an insult to the man trying to stand in the gap. I didn't rush any of it. Church before dinner. 3 months of losing at chess before I ever mentioned marriage, and I mean losing badly, on purpose at first, and then not on purpose at all, because the boy turned out to actually be good at it once he stopped performing indifference for my benefit. Those Saturday afternoons over a chessboard taught me more about him than any conversation could have, how carefully he thought 2 and 3 moves ahead, how rarely he let his guard down even in a game, how his shoulders only ever relaxed once he'd already won. When I finally proposed, I told Nkiro the truth about my body first, the explosion, the surgery, the children I'd never fathered, braced for the disappointment I was certain was coming. It never came. I already have a son, she said, taking both my hands in the kitchen light. Maybe you were always meant to be his father. I cried that night, alone in my car in her driveway, engine off, hands still on the wheel. Not from sadness. From a relief so large it frightened me, the relief of a man who had stopped expecting to be chosen. We married small, mostly Mama Soda's tears and a borrowed hoe. Ton stood beside me at the altar instead of beside his mother, his choice, not mine, and it meant more to me than any vow exchange that day. I started calling him my boy within the month, and he never once corrected me. I told myself that meant something. I still believe, even now, that for a while it did. For a season, it was good. Genuinely good. Nkiro learned exactly how I took my tea, 2 sugars, splash of milk, never before 90 seconds of cooling. Ton asked for help with his college applications and actually used my notes. I let myself believe, cautiously, the way a man believes in weather that could still turn, that I'd finally been handed back some version of the family illness had stolen from me the night of the explosion. I didn't know yet that the phone call I'd overheard months earlier wasn't only grief talking. It was a preview I hadn't wanted to read closely enough. And the language lessons I'd started in secret, the gift I thought I was quietly building toward my wife, were about to become the one thing standing between me and the truth, arriving faster than I had any reason to expect. Have you ever noticed a warning sign early and talked yourself out of it because the good moments felt too real to doubt? Tell me when, I want to hear how it played out for you. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications. 6 months of lessons doesn't make a man fluent. It makes him dangerous in a room where people still think he's deaf to them. I never announced what I was doing. Only Mama Sod knew, because she was the only one who ever paused long enough to ask why my lips kept moving when I thought no one watched. She had her own reasons for understanding quiet devotion, a son of her own, lost young to a fever no doctor caught in time, back home, years before she ever came to work in my house. She never spoke of him often. When she did, her voice went soft in a way I recognized, because it was the same softness in my own voice whenever anyone asked why I never had children. You're doing this for her, she said one evening, not really a question, setting a plate in front of me. I want to pray with her the way her mother once did, I told her. In words that feel like home, not words she has to translate before they reach her heart. Mama Sod went quiet the way people do when they know something you don't yet, and are deciding whether it's theirs to tell. Love always sounds sweeter in someone's mother tongue, she said again, softer this time. Then, almost to herself, so does everything else. I filed it away and kept studying. My illness worsened in stages, fatigue first, then breathlessness, then the tank itself, a second shadow that traveled everywhere with me, humming under every conversation I had left. Nkiro was attentive through all of it, holding my hand in waiting rooms that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Ton carried my bags to the car without being asked, adjusted the seat, made sure the tubing didn't catch on the door. One evening I came downstairs earlier than expected and heard Nkiro on the phone in the kitchen, voice low and clipped in her native language, words I now have recognized after months of study. I caught only a fragment, something about when it's finalized. My stomach dropped. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, certain I already knew what I was hearing. I nearly answered her, right there, in her own language, before I caught myself and swallowed the words whole. I confronted her instead, gently, later that night. She laughed, surprised, and explained she was finalizing a surprise, a small trip for my birthday, and hadn't wanted me to overhear the planning. 2 days later she showed me the flight confirmation on her phone. I felt ashamed of my own suspicion. I apologized. I told myself illness was making me paranoid, hunting for betrayal in a family that was only ever ordinary and imperfect, the way every family is. I stopped listening as closely after that. I let my guard down exactly when I should have kept it up, because the phone call I'd nearly exposed myself over had, in fact, been innocent. It was the next one, 3 weeks later, that wasn't. And by then I had already decided, quietly, that my ears had betrayed me once and I shouldn't trust them again. I had no idea how close I already stood to understanding everything, or that the moment I'd spent 6 months preparing for was about to arrive at my own dinner table, disguised as an ordinary Sunday, under a chandelier that had watched over every dinner I'd ever hosted and had never once warned me about this one. It's a Sunday evening. Nothing about the table looks different from any other night we've shared beneath that chandelier. Mama Sod has made pepper soup, thick with catfish and scent leaf, steam curling past the good china, a basket of bread and a dish of butter set between us. Nkiru sits across from me in a cream lace dress. Ton is beside her, phone face down for once, actually present. My oxygen tank sits in its usual place by my chair, tubing looped behind my ear, humming its low, patient rhythm beneath the clink of spoons, the skyline darkening to violet behind the glass. They slip into her native language, the way they often do, the private current under the English we share, one I've always let pass over me like water over stone. Tonight I understand every word of it. It starts small. Nkiru mentions, almost idly, that the doctor's last update wasn't good. Ton asks, just as idly, how long? She says weeks, maybe less. Then Ton says something that stops my spoon halfway to my mouth. He says it's almost funny, that a man who can't even give her a real child of his own still thinks he's earned the right to be called family. He says it lightly, like a punchline he's been saving. Nkiru laughs. Soft. Easy. The kind of laugh that's been rehearsed in private more than once. She says it's fitting, really, a man with nothing to leave behind in his own blood, finally leaving everything behind in his bank account instead. She calls me a dying wallet. Ton mimics the hiss of my oxygen machine, exaggerating it into something ridiculous, something to perform at dinner instead of something keeping his stepfather alive. He says it won't be long now, light as weather, and reaches for another piece of bread like he hasn't said anything at all. They start listing things, comfortable in a language they believe is a locked room. The house. The company shares. Which car Ton takes first, and whether the second one's even worth keeping. Nkiru says something about finally resting once I'm gone. Ton laughs so hard he sets his fork down on the marble, the sound sharp and small and enormous all at once. I finish my soup. I don't interrupt. I don't raise my voice. I don't let my hand shake, though something in my chest has gone still and cold, like a door closing somewhere I can't see but can feel in the draft moving through the room. 6 months of study, and the first full conversation I ever understand in that language is my own eulogy, delivered early, with laughter, aimed at the one wound I never told either of them about, the one I thought I had buried too deep for anyone to find without my permission. This is what Mama Sod meant, wiping down a counter she wasn't really looking at. Love sounds sweeter in someone's mother tongue. So does contempt. So, I now understand, does cruelty aim precisely at the softest place it can find. I say goodnight the way I always do. I kiss Nkiru's forehead and feel her smile against my lips like nothing has happened. I tell Ton to finish his homework, and he says he will, Dad, the easy tone of a boy who has no idea what his stepfather just heard, and understood, and swallowed whole without a single word. That night, alone in my study, chandelier light bleeding faintly under the door, I don't cry. I don't rage. I sit very still in the leather chair that has held me through worse nights than this one, and I let the silence do what shouting never could. Something in me has ended. Something else, quieter and far more certain, is only just beginning. You just heard what I heard. Would you have stayed silent that night, or said something right there at the table? Tell me honestly, I want both answers. Don't forget to subscribe. What I do next isn't what either of them expects. I don't sleep. I sit with my Bible open across my lap for hours and read none of it, replaying my wife's laughter in a language she never imagined I'd understand, and my stepson's punchline landing exactly where he must have known, on some level, it would hurt most. By morning I know I won't confront them. Not from weakness. I've learned, across 58 hard years, that the loudest response to betrayal is rarely the wisest one, and a dying man can't spend what little time he has left on rage that changes nothing. I call my pastor before breakfast. He's known me since before the explosion, before the money, before any of this. I tell him everything, the language, the 6 months of secret study, the dinner, the exact words aimed at the one place I never told them I was still tender. He listens without interrupting once, then says only this. Justice belongs to God, Kolechi. Your responsibility is obedience. I sit with that for days, turning it over the way I once turned over new words in a language I was learning for love. Then, 3 weeks later, I hear the second conversation, Nkiru, on the phone again, in the garden this time, speaking to someone about moving certain accounts before the paperwork gets messy. Not a birthday trip this time. Not innocent. She was already planning what to do with money that wasn't hers yet, weeks before I'd even changed a single line of my will. That's the moment the last of my hesitation leaves me, not the dinner. The dinner was cruelty spoken once, in a weak moment, maybe even regretted by morning. This was a plan, built patiently, the same way I'd once patiently built a language lesson by lesson. I call my lawyer that same afternoon. I tell him I want to rewrite my will, not from spite. I make myself certain of that before I ever say it to him out loud, because I need to be certain of my own motives before I put anyone else's future on paper. Spite would make me no different from the two people who laughed under my own chandelier about the one thing I never gave either of them permission to laugh about. We worked through it over 2 long weeks, meeting in the evenings when my energy is lowest and my mind, strangely, clearest. Nkiru receives exactly what I promised her before we married, not a naira more, not a naira less, because a promise is still a promise, even to someone who broke every promise of her own without knowing I could hear them break it. Ton receives the college fund I set aside for him years ago, already established, untouched by anything said at that table. Almost everything else, the company built from a single rented truck, 3 decades of properties and accounts, goes to Mama Sod. 11 years of quiet, unglamorous kindness that never once asked to be noticed, from a woman who understood, better than anyone else in my life, what it costs to love someone you've already lost once. The remainder establishes a foundation for children facing illness, families walking the road I walked after the explosion, alone in waiting rooms, praying for a miracle nobody promised them and nobody was obligated to give. I write the message more times than I can count before I ever turn the recorder on. Early drafts are angrier than I want them to be, I can hear it in my own handwriting, letters pressed too hard into the page. I tear those up. I want the version that finally gets recorded to sound like the man who spent 6 months learning her language out of love, not the man who discovered, halfway through, what that love had been mistaken for. Last, I record one final message, by hand, word by word, late into the night, in the very language I spent 6 months learning to say I love you in. Now, instead, it will tell my wife something else entirely, something true, spoken gently, in the only language that could make her understand exactly how much I heard. Would you have kept digging after the first phone call turned out to be innocent, or let your guard down the way I almost did? Tell me below. 3 months later, my body finally gives out the way the doctors always warned it would, peacefully, in my sleep, with Mama Soda's hymn still playing softly from the radio in the next room, the way it had most nights that final year. The reading of the will happens in my lawyer's office on a grey Tuesday morning, no chandelier here, just fluorescent light and a long conference table. Nkiru sits stiff by the window in a black dress, hands folded too tightly, already sensing something isn't going the way she expected. Ton won't stop checking his phone, Tom moving over the screen like the numbers waiting for him somewhere might change if he refreshes hard enough. My lawyer reads the terms plainly. The promised amount to Nkiru, exactly as agreed before our wedding. The college fund to Ton. Then everything else, company, properties, 3 decades of wealth, to Mama Sod, and to the foundation now carrying my name into rooms I would never see. Nkiru's face drains of color, slow, like watching ice melt in reverse. Ton stands so fast his chair scrapes hard against the floor. Then my lawyer presses play. My voice fills the room, steady and unhurried, speaking in Nkiru's native language, fluent in a way she never once heard from me alive, every syllable practiced across 6 months she knew nothing about. I learned these words to tell you I loved you, the recording says. Instead, they became the words through which I learned the truth, including the truth about what you both decided to say about the one thing in my life I never had the chance to choose for myself. The room goes completely silent. Nkiru's hand rises slowly to cover her mouth. Ton stares at the small speaker on the desk as though it might somehow take the words back. I heard you both, that night at the table, my voice continues, unwavering. And I heard you again, weeks later, in the garden, planning what to do with money that wasn't yours yet. I said nothing, because I decided my last act toward you would be greater than your worst act toward me. I forgive them, out loud, on the recording, without qualification. I tell them I am praying for them still, and that I mean every word of it. Then scripture, lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and the recording ends with a small, quiet click that somehow sounds louder than everything that came before it. Nobody in that office speaks for a long time. Nkiru started attending church again. Alone. Not asking for money, not contesting a single line of the will. Just sitting quietly in the back pew, head bowed, the way people sit when they are finally, painfully ready to be honest with themselves. I didn't leave behind the biggest inheritance I could have left. I left behind the only one that ever truly mattered, proof that a man can hear every cruel word spoken about the one wound he never showed anyone, and still choose, deliberately, to answer in a gentler language than the one used against him. That was the real lesson buried in 6 months of quiet study, longer than I understood while I was still living it. I didn't learn her language to catch her. I learned it to find out how much grace I still had left to speak, once I finally understood exactly what I was being asked to forgive. If this story moved you, tell me, would you have exposed them that same night, or waited like I did? Drop your answer below, I read every single one. If you've ever felt underestimated by people who claim to love you, subscribe now. There are more stories like mine waiting for you. Thank you for staying until the end.
They thought I inherited an old house. They had no idea what you actually left me.